Welcome back to the Community Impact Series. I'm your host, Chakeia Blocker. Over the past 2 weeks, we've met the leader and explored the journey behind her mission. Today, we discover how that purpose extends beyond the one organization to build stronger relationships, partnerships, and healthier communities. Welcome to Chapter 3, Community Connections. So we spoke about how things change, when a couple is dating and they're having sex, they, get aroused, so they have good pleasure. Yeah. And then it changes when they're married. What's the mental connection with that? And could you explain more about the change?
Yeah, we change, right? Yeah. We change throughout our life. Mm-hmm. We're not the same as when we were 15, 25, 75. We're not the same. So we can't expect our bodies to be the same. We're going to change mentally. We're going to change physically. We're going to change, psychologically. So all of those things change. So I always tell couples, why do we expect to stay stagnant? You can't when it comes to your sexual health. You can't when it comes to your mental health. So you have to do what I like to call those check-ins, right, in a relationship. Are we enjoying? And don't do it during that. I always tell my couples, don't do it, when you're getting ready to. No, do it over dinner. Do it, when you're having some quiet time together, having those check-ins so that you're understanding there may be a change. Is there something that I could do better? Is there something that you enjoy more, exploring with each other? Because like you said in the beginning, you may be aroused differently and really excited differently when you're dating, etc. And that is a different realm, right? But once you have been married for 5, 10, how many ever years, things are going to change. You're going to change individually. You're going to change as a couple. And when you throw kiddos in the mix, that's a whole nother gamut, right? Your body, both men and women. I think there's this misconception that men, they don't change, but they do mentally as well too. And so having those check-ins and really making sure that you're comfortable. And so let me even back it up a little bit. This is why having healthy communications around healthy relationships are important early, right? Because if you're more comfortable having these conversations, whether it be about understanding my body, the older you get, you'll be able to have these conversations in a relationship. What I like, what I don't like, what pleasures me, what doesn't pleasure me. I used to like this, but I don't like this now, but I'm open to trying something different. And so having these early conversations, age appropriate, right, at an early age, will empower you to have healthier conversations as you get into a relationship.
It's almost like, because you'll know yourself.
You'll know yourself.
So you'll know what pleases you, what don't.
Exactly.
Oh.
Exactly, yes.
Because, that makes sense.
Sexual health, it really doesn't exist in isolation. It doesn't. And so that's why we have to continue to have the conversations, and making sure that we're having them in a safe space. Yeah. Awesome.
And you touched on it with the maternal, and I guess I want to explore more. So with maternal health, how does that shift, because your hormones change after you have a baby, everything changes, your time is divided, and the husbands or boyfriends or partners, they sometimes understand, sometimes they don't. So how are you able to navigate that with your couples and explain so the other partner understands it's not the woman not wanting time, it's just maybe her hormones doesn't help her get aroused as easily as it was before. It take a little longer for the car to get tuned up. You know, you got to put a little bit more work in it. So how can you explain more on that?
Yeah, so you touched on a really great piece there. And what I like to tell, just anything around maternal health, pregnancy, etc. Healthy pregnancies begin long before the pregnancy. It begins with education. It begins with healthy relationships. It begins with communication. And so that is key. And so being able to have those healthy conversations with your significant other, with your partner, is vital, because yes, our bodies are changing, and like you heard what I said earlier, it's not just women's bodies who are changing, it's everyone who's in the relationship who is changing, right? You're not the same. And so recognizing those changes and being able to be comfortable with talking about those changes, right? And so saying, hey, I may not feel like it because X, Y, and Z, or I'm just not excited the way I used to. Well, there may need to be a deeper conversation with a health provider, and that's okay.
Right.
Just like I like to also say, if you were to fall and, you know, hurt your knee, and over time it's going to continue to hurt, are you just going to let it hurt, or are you going to go seek help?
Seek help.
So why don't we do the same with our sexual health, right? If there's something wrong, are you just going to let it manifest into something bigger, or are you going to seek professional help? And I think oftentimes folks aren't comfortable. And let me say this too, it's not just the folks who are in the relationship, it's also our providers. Yes, it's also our providers. So I do a lot of education with providers as well, making sure that they understand having the conversations with your patients, with your clients, so that they feel empowered to come to you with a situation that they may need help with.
And it makes sense, asking certain questions, especially after, I guess, with the 6-week checkup and things like that, checking in instead of just creating a safe space for their patients. Yes. What's a good way for parents to approach this topic with their kids, and how much should they share, and what should they refrain from sharing?
Yeah, it depends on the age. I always go with age appropriateness, right? Okay. So it depends on if you have, you know, a toddler, or if you had, I know, you know, parents are like, what do you mean toddler? Yes, you're having conversations around sex education with your toddler. I have a soon-to-be 5-year-old, like I mentioned, and we talk to her about body autonomy. We talk to her about consent. We talk to her about boundaries. And consent can be, I can give you just a very small example. If I wanted to reach over and put my hand on your shoulder without asking you, is that consent?
Yes. Oh no, that's not consent.
Right. And so I have to say, is it okay if I touch you? That is consent, right? Oftentimes we have, you know, folks out here just going around giving hugs and, you know, touching shoulders and consent. So that is sex education, right? And that is sex education for our young people. And then, you know, you get to, I'll just move up a little bit quickly here, you get to our preteen age, right? Having conversations about healthy relationships, healthy friendships. We talk a lot about that, right? Because unhealthy friendships can turn into unhealthy relationships, and we don't necessarily, you know, talk to our kiddos about relationships because we automatically go to what? Intimacy. And it's bigger than that. Friendships, having that conversation with our young people about if this is a good friend or not. What does that look like? Because if you're able to say, this is not a good friend, or what a good friend looks like, and really check off those boxes, then you'll be able to do the same thing in a relationship. Right, when it comes to red flags, this is not someone who is treating me correctly, because if I don't like this in a friendship, why would I like this in a relationship, right? And so moving up a little bit more, when we get into our high school years, right, having conversations with, you know, are you in a healthy relationship, you know, because that's our, let's be for real, in high school there's dating going on, you know, there's proms, what happens at prom night, you know, so having these conversations with our young people, but it starts really early, and it starts as soon as young people are able to talk. Now, if you are a parent and you're listening, you're like, well, my kid is not a toddler anymore, and I still, you know, want to have the conversation with them, you know, don't make it awkward. You know, you're driving the car, you guys may be going to get something to eat. You know, how was your day? Anyone, you know, mess with you? Like, did they piss you off? You know, just kind of have a natural conversation. That's the biggest thing. Have it as a conversation, and don't make it awkward. You know, hey, are you having sex? Like, you don't need to make it so, you know, and I think that's the thing. Weird. You know, parents want to we just want to know it all versus kind of teasing into it a little bit, knowing about who that young person is as an individual. That makes sense. And should these conversations be with both genders, or male and female, or should it be separate? I think just in terms of like sex education, young people need to know all of the information together, right? When it comes to consent, young boys, young girls, they need to know that. Healthy relationships, they need to know that. Communication, they need to know that. These are things that are going to help them navigate throughout life, right? And we don't, again, think about this in the sex education umbrella, but it very much so is, because it is about wellness. It is about health. So I think, you know, the conversations that you're having with your sons, having with your daughters, and vice versa, you know. And so, like I mentioned, I keep mentioning my daughter, but we also have 2 sons as well too. So the conversations that we have with them, we use a lot of, you know, books. We like to read books with them, and really, there are great sex education books out there, age appropriate books. So I often tell parents, you know, if you're looking for certain books, reach out to us. There's so many great authors out there. For example, your daughter starts her cycle. Yes. There are great books out there if you are uncomfortable having that conversation, use a book as a tool. You know, if you're uncomfortable, you know, reading the book, there's pictures, you know, to help you navigate that. One thing I will say, before you have the conversation with your young person, have the conversation with yourself. Right? Have the conversation with yourself, have the conversation with your partner, have the conversation with a friend, so that you feel comfortable going to that young person and having those conversations. Because if you are comfortable saying, okay, I know I need to have this conversation with, you know, my son, my daughter, etc., then the conversation is gonna flow freely. And I had to do this recently with my 4-year-old. You know, there was a situation, and I'm like, okay, we need to talk about body autonomy, because she's at that age, you know, where she is like, oh, okay, now I know where my chest is. I know where breasts are. I know where vulva is. I know, because we've taught them that, right? Yeah. And so we had to talk about, okay, the importance of privacy. You can't run around all the time with your panties off. That's not, you know, we live in a full house, you know, and, you know, someone knocks on the door, you can't just run around with, you know, and of course you want them to feel comfortable, but also understand boundaries too.
Every story leaves us with something to carry forward. Next week, we'll conclude our conversation with Omotunde Sowole-West as she shares words of encouragement, leadership, and purpose that you won't want to miss. Join us for our final chapter, Words of Inspiration.